With Star Citizen finishing on a strong note in 2023, many promising things hinted for 2024. Almost every content creator has done a predictions video for 2024, but being a bit late to that party, I thought that I would do mine a little differently and make this as a recap video of 2024, as if it was a year from now, and that will make it more fun when, a year from now, we get to see how good or bad my prognostication was. Hello, this is Daniel Raymond, the voice behind Ray's Guide, and welcome to my 2024 year in review for Star Citizen and Squadron 42. It certainly was a big year for both. Like most years, 2024 began with the annual exercise known as Planning Week, which has progressively grown to much more than 1 week with the size and scope of the company. And this year's Planning Week was particularly complicated as this was the first one following the redeployment of development forces since Squadron 42 becoming feature complete. After a few worried days of doldrums, we saw the first real progress report update and the first set of feature cards for 3.23, and some folks suggested that CIG Merch Store sell logo-branded spatulas for helping both backers and skeptics scrape their jaws off the floor. And as more things reached their final green light, the list for cards for 3.23 just kept getting bigger and bigger. None of the features were particularly surprising because they'd all been teased both at Citizencon and in official CIG communications, but there was just so many of them. In addition to things like the new character creator and much of the new Mobiglas, the replication layer was fully implemented with the server crash recovery. 3.23 contained the first of the new distribution center facilities, specifically the Grey Cat Industries one that had been previewed at Citizencon. Then with subsequent releases throughout the year, additional ones were rolled out, including different branding as well as different breakdown of spaces. Some without the executive suite, some with more industrial machinery, some with underground spaces that we had been previewed earlier, etc. Still, the old bunkers continue to hang around in their old roles, while the missions that were designed for them faded out and are replaced elsewhere. The old outposts still remain in the game economically. Most of the supply and demand for those commodities, though, were scaled back to the distribution centers, and most of the cargo missions from the old outposts were small-scale deliveries to those distribution centers, which set a clear path for the economics model of the cargo game. Small ship cargo missions suitable for freelancers and such from the outposts to and from the distribution centers, larger scale lift missions from the surface to orbital cargo centers for Caterpillars, Carracks, and Hercules, and then major inventory leveling runs between the cargo stations themselves, within the system and between systems, traversed by the larger hull crafts, giving each of the categories of cargo craft permanent niches rather than the smaller cargo ships be just the thing you grew out of. But these changes in the cargo system made 2024 a year of constant adjustments to the economy as the economics team tried to keep up with the changing landscape through simple tabular and algorithmic solutions, while the long-awaited quantum system remained on hold and concerns increased that it might not have been the right solution all along. Another of the more problematic areas uncovered with 3.23 was trying to bring master modes to the broader game, and this presented a dilemma. Master modes had already been fine-tuned for combat craft in Squadron 42, so going back to revise how it worked on combat craft was a non-starter. But as it got applied to racing and shuttles and large cargo craft and career ships, it became less and less perfected. So what do? The tack that was eventually settled on was to leverage the component systems. In other words, a competition-level power plant would behave very differently in master modes than a military one, not just tweaking the numbers, but changing the actual way in which the competition engine affected shields or weapons and whatever that would make it great for racing, but which you would never accept in a fighter craft. This solved both problems, having master modes still be just as well-tuned for dogfighting and equally well-tuned, but entirely differently, for racing, just a matter of using the right components for the job. This meant the gradual return to something that was originally part of the game design but dropped, and that was that certain ships could only mount certain classes of components. For example, that a racer can only mount competition components, a fighter, military, or stealth, a commercial ship, civilian, or industrial. Not as strictly as the hard and fast rules originally proposed, but de facto limits based on allowing tuning of master modes for racing, trade, career, and merchant ships while not changing it for Squadron 42. Freight elevators and squadron missions were introduced first in 3.23 simply as instance hangars at the space stations and distribution centers and changed the whole nature of the cargo game, and then the additional level of complexity of persistent hangars was expected in 3.23, but actually delayed some for reasons of CIG saying that they needed more time to work out the edge cases, such as whether you could have more than one of them at a particular place, or whether you could request a larger instance hangar than your persistent hangar. Both of these raised critical questions that not everyone was satisfied with the answers. But persistent hangars really changed the feel of what it meant to have a home city. The character customizer received a lot of fanfare in 3.23, although its actual significance was as a preview of the level of polish that Squadron 42 was receiving. But perhaps nothing was more eagerly received than the updated Mobiglas, which was rolled out in basic form in 3.23 branch and then added more features for mapping and scanning as the year went on. And people were as ready as you could be imagined to get that old star map to be a distant memory. Invictus launch week showed the first fruits of CIG's announced push towards reducing the capital ship backlog through sequential concentration on the RSI ships in it. This meant the ready-for-flyable sail of the Polaris, an almost fully completed Apollo, not immediately flyable, but clearly on track for the IAE, and a very advanced gray box of the Javelin with a last chance before flyable tease like was done for the Hull C. And then showed a much further along gray box of the Galaxy, and in non-RSI ship news, the beginning of the availability of genuine modularity with the new gold standard version of the Reclaimer, finally being able to store and retrieve the internal modules to it when you checked it in and out. Also, CIG began switching the hull-limited ships from an F5 war to an in-game platinum ticket like they did with the F8C special sale, because with these ships getting closer to their flyable price jumps, keeping them behind a system as arbitrary as the F5 wars was creating too much frustration. But even more than the arrival of the long-awaited craft, the Polaris was the launch ship of the new engineering system, although also quickly right after it was the Hercules, and well as other large multi-crew ships. Orgs will have to spend a lot of time organizing events to also include planning who will be crewing each ship in which role. Skilled ship engineers will be highly prized, and it will not be uncommon for the ship owner to be the engineer rather than the pilot, because it turned out to be a lot easier to find a trustworthy pilot than a trustworthy engineer. Running parallel to all this, and often with the same excitement as the PTU and live releases, was the Tech Preview channel. At the start of the year, the Tech Preview of the replication layer had just run over the entire holiday period with general stability, indicating that it was time to move on. And this resulted in multiple limited-time previews of the outer planets of Pyro, then the inner planets of Pyro with expanded features such as the importance of the reputation system with the gangs of Pyro, and then some tests allowing both the inner and outer planets of Pyro, these being the first tests of the actual static server meshing, with the handoff occurring during the long quantum travel between the inner and outer planets. Then the Tech Preview added the jump tunnel with 1 and then 2 static servers covering the inner and outer planets of Stanton. And with that, once it showed itself to be stable, became 4.0, with lots of fanfare outside the fan base, but with the dedicated fans already quite at home. But there was a strong incentive to have Pyro with full server meshing in time for Citizencon, which they did, which of course brings up that Citizencon and how they managed to exceed the excellent Los Angeles event from the year before. There was a lot of discussion leading up to it whether it should occur in Montreal, because that had never hosted one before, and Manchester because it was beyond time to show off the new corporate headquarters. Eventually, it was decided the nature of the announcements for this Citizencon deserved the stature of the corporate headquarters. And this year, it matched the 2-day format of the previous day. But rather than ending the event with the open house that really had too few of the people who wanted to get there a ticket, that they added an optional third day devoted entirely to timed guided tours, demonstrations, and activities at the headquarters. Since the Manchester headquarters contained so many cool spaces like the mocap studio, the sets where ISC is recorded, and such. And to the event itself, there was a heavy emphasis on the systems beyond the Pyro, now that we finally had Pyro. Specifically, in order, first Nyx, then Odin, because it is Squadron 42, in the one direction, and then Magnus and Ellis in the other direction from Stanton, and then connecting Terra to both Stanton and Magnus to create the first triangle route, and completing the game's 3 primary starter system choices: Stanton, Terra, and Ellis. Part of the impressiveness of the demonstrations was how far along, showing most of the planets already had been completed in Engine, giving the impression that now that server meshing was a fact, we should see delivery of these star systems at a better than 1 per year rate. Technical presentations also focused on developing an economic model that can work algorithmically across all of these supply and demand points across multiple star systems, and a progress report on the tools of user base building and what planets of these upcoming systems would be the choices for land claims availability. But that wasn't the real headline, as much as it was. The real headline was the announcement of pre-sales of Squadron 42 and the hands-on area, comparable to Pyro Playground in LA, allowing users to play the character setup and opening mission of Squadron 42. As part of the announcement, players who purchased through pre-sale would get a special UEE veteran clothing and armor items usable immediately in the persistent universe, and players who had Squadron 42 through a pledge while they were being sold, got both the UEE veteran clothing and armor plus a classic UEE veteran clothing and armor set usable immediately in the persistent universe. The result that by the end of Citizencon, the project had easily blown through the $750 million in funding, and at the end of the year, the billion-dollar line seemed easily within reach of 2025. But the usual cast of characters pulled up their story templates and changed the dollar values from the last time and the end dates or lack of end date from the previous time, and ran up the same complaints about how it would never be everything it was promised, it's taking so long, it's a scam, yada, yada, yada. Because once you've invested that much in building a preconceived narrative, it seems a shame to let it go to waste. And that is where we stand at the end of 2024. With so much progress on so many fronts, the game is feeling much like the mature product with plenty of future promise, yet somehow still not being able to get a break from the long-standing narratives of the doubters. But let's hope that 2025 will be even more exciting with base building development and discovering Nyx and Odin. Happy New Year, everyone! And now look back at 2024 from my channel. In December of 23, Ray's Guide had just passed 100,000 hours of total watch time. Thank you very much. And I tried my first clumsy attempt at responding to members' comments in a members-exclusive live stream. Fortunately, I got a lot better at it over the course of 2024, and members responded by making comments because they wanted to see my response in the live stream. Ray's Guide started the year at 89% of my near-term subscriber goal of 15,000 and 80% of my short-term membership and member retention goal of 1,500 cumulative member hours of current members. And during 2024, I was able to give away that Zippy Zazzy Zactive Zephyr, the Zeus 2 cargo, but we're still working to give away the massive multiplayer multi-role mining meta, the Erasta. One entry per video, just be a member for automatic entry, or subscribe and somehow comment using, you know it, the secret word. And the secret word for this video is the item that was suggested that CIG add to the merch store. Fly safe, keep it real, and I'll see you in the verse. This is Daniel Raymond for Ray's Guide.